Hi everyone, my name is Zixian from University of Galway, Ireland, and I'm a PhD student and supervised by Tag Farina Siber. And today I'm delighted to share my recent research about assessing the code clone detection capability of large language modules. So let's first have an overview of that. So basically, this is like a preliminary study about accessing the code clone detection abilities of various large language model. For currently, we only evaluate two uh, kind of SOTA model like GPT 3.5 and GPT-4, and we use two different data sets, which is one from human-made, the big clone bench, and the second one is GPT-generated code clone. And we use the few-shot prompt to see if the module can detect the code clone successfully and how its performance. So let me illustrate my motivation of this research. So code clone is kind of essential roles in software development. It helps us to preventing bugs, to ensure consistency, and to reduce redundancies. Actually, there are various tools to detect such code clones. Introduce some like traditional tools like the they extract the patterns and to match the patterns or to match the trees to see if they are clone. And some of them it's been popular to use like machine learning based modules. Like they extract the code pair patterns to compare them in some specific machine learning models like random trees or some classifier. And more recently, people start to focus more on deep learning based, like they use different deep learning architecture to extract the code representation better to fit to help the model to better understand the code. But if we take a look at the large language model based for code clone detection, we only find a few research involved. So that's why we want to push this area more far further to this. Let me first give some background of what is code clone and how it's typed. So code clone is basically like the two code is showing the similar functions or similar structures. So in mainstream of the research community, we define the code clone into different several types. For type 1, you can see it's basically exactly the same structure and the syntax. And for type 2, there might be some changes of the characters and but the structure is still same. And for type 3, they might add some like new statements, but the basic structure is still same. And for type 4, it's just it's a most tricky one, and it only shows the functional similarity, but the structure and the syntax is usually totally different. And this is what we try to find how large language model can detect code clone type 4 performance. So, and the background of the GPT. So recently we all have the lots of benefits of the GPT like question answering and financial analysis. And of course, in software development, as many researchers introduced, they have like many impressive applications like code generation, code summarization, but for code clone detection, there's still limited research about this. And there are some difference between human-made and GPT-made generated clones. Because before the large language model proposed, we mostly focus on human-made clones, and is many directly copy-paste by human, and all the thoughts, the brain is all created by human. And afterwards, when the GPT code generation tools generated like Copilot or lots of others code generator tools. There's lots of like GPT code clones in real projects, and it might be, and it shows different functionality and structures compared with like human, like because like the AI based code clone is more based on the patterns and is totally different from the human. So we might also want to find that if the GPT can recognize the human-made clone better or GPT clone better. So here is our approach. We use two datasets. The first one is GPT clone bench, which is a GPT generated code clone, and the big BCB clone bench, which is human-made, the biggest benchmark of the code clone detection, and we use few short prompts to detect basically its content of main instruction to tell what the model should do, and the explanation and the example shows the sample input and the sample outputs and the query to ask them. And here's the performance. So for various model comparison, we could say the upper is the GPT-3 distribution and the lower is the GPT-4 distribution. We could say that the GPT-4 is obviously better than GPT-3, especially when the similarity score over 0.5, the GPT-4 can handle the code clone very well. But when the similarity score down than 0.5 of the code clone pairs, and both models shows a relative bad performance. And we also compare performance between different data sources. Okay. Yeah. We could say that even if for clone type 4, both GPT-4 and GPT-4.5, they have a relative bad performance, but still, GPT can have a very obvious bias when they detect the GPT-based code clones, and it is said that like they can recognize their own created clone better compared with the real world project. So that is obvious bias to say. So basically, this is our circuit small research about that. We have used virus dataset and a few short prompts to detect the capabilities of GPT-0.5 and 0.3 in detecting code clones. And we found that the GPT-4 has a obvious performance compared with GPT-3, but we still have found the bias for both modules. They could detect their own created code clones much better compared with the human-made clones. Our future work will more focus on the different size of large language model like CodeLlama or CodeGMA, and to maintain this method to more languages like Java, Python, or even cross-language code clones. And we might to involve the more techniques like chain of thought or fine tuning to see if like large language model can fit the code clone task by better, because compared with the deep learning module, the large language model still have a relatively low performance. So we might need to optimize this performance in the future. So that is my research. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you very much. I have a question. When you were asking this ChatGPT for detecting the clones, you were expecting binary answers from them, either yes or no, or they were able to say, okay, just a binary.
Yeah, I think it's based on how you design your prompt. Like if you directly ask, tell me if the giving code pairs are clone or not, they probably give you yes or no, and they probably give you some explanation. But for my experiment, I want to focus on the classification problem. So I just ask the GPT to like no explanation is required, and they only properly giving yes or no. And that is also happened when on my recent experiments on the most small size larger model, like 1.3 billion, that their answer will more various, even if I give their very well-designed prompt to say no explanation, just yes or no. So, but for GPT-3 and 4, they give very clear result if you have a very clear prompt. Yeah.
Because according to my understanding of what the type 4 clones are, they could be quite far away from the original code. For the type 1 and
yeah, it's a totally different functions. And no, it's the same functions, but looks very very different, and that is code clone type 4. So we in some data set we will quantize this like based on similarity. So some is based on the text similarity or the structure similarity. They will transfer it to AST or graph based and to compare the difference between them, and they have a score. So usually when the score is lower than 0.5, which means they have a different functional, which means they have a different structure. And but in fact they have the when you're giving the same input, they will have the same output, which means they have totally same functions. So that is a clone type 4.
Okay, Zixian, thank you very much for your presentation,
thank you
for your
so much.
paper. Okay.